The anger within the U.S. against Israel's offensive is rising. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd testified to the Senate Appropriations Committee on Biden's request for $105 billion to fund ambitious plans for Ukraine, Israel and U.S. border security. But the President Joe Biden's top advisors at the congressional hearing were interrupted repeatedly by protesters denouncing American officials for backing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza.
If the witness will suspend, and I ask that everyone again respect this hearing, we will suspend until the room is cleared.
Is calling for a ceasefire. Shame on you all. The world is calling for a ceasefire. The American people don't want to support this brutal war. Stop the war. Stop the...
Israeli forces are pushing deep inside Gaza, raising tensions across West Asia and beyond, and even as the Biden administration has thrown its weight behind Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it is struggling to get its nuance right. When Hamas militants burst out of Gaza and attacked southern Israel on October 7th, Biden offered full-throttle support for Israel, saying he relayed to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that Israel has a right to defend itself and its people. He did not mention the Palestinian people. Biden's trip to Israel was clouded by a strike on a Gaza hospital. Condemnations flew thick and fast from across the world. Biden was forced to cut short his visit to Jordan, where he was scheduled to meet Palestinian leaders. Let me take you through the sequence of statements in the past 3 weeks that shows you how the U.S. has been changing his stance and statements, starting with October 10th, when Biden called the attack on Israel by Hamas an act of sheer evil.
Hamas seeks to maximize civilian casualties.
I just got off the phone with the third call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I told him the United States experience what Israel is experiencing, our response would be swift, decisive, and overwhelming.
Flying home after a brief Tel Aviv visit, Biden told reporters that he had been blunt with the Israelis about the need to support getting aid to Palestinians in Gaza and pledged support to Israelis and humanitarian assistance to suffering Palestinians.
No, I was very blunt about the need to support getting humanitarian aid to Gaza. Get it to Gaza and do it quickly.
Beyond the soundbites, Biden's aides have been urging their Israeli counterparts to take more time to carefully think through their exit strategy before mounting a full-scale ground invasion. But with Israel deciding to go into Gaza, the White House is keeping a close tab amidst fears of the conflict expanding. The most rapid shift in U.S. policy took place this week in order to prevent Israel from embarking on its ground invasion while allowing aid inside and the people to escape. With pressing international demands for a humanitarian pause, White House now says that the United States wants to make sure Israel has the tools it needs to defend itself and to go after Hamas, and that humanitarian assistance keeps flowing, but making a distinction between the Hamas and the residents of Gaza. Listen to what the U.S. Secretary of State said a week ago, which was mentioned earlier by Biden in Philly.
We know Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people, and Palestinian civilians are not to blame for the carnage committed by Hamas. Palestinian civilians must be protected. That means Hamas must cease using them as human shields. It's hard to think of an act of greater cynicism. It means Israel must take all possible precautions to avoid harm to civilians. It means food, water, medicine, and other essential humanitarian assistance must be able to flow into Gaza and to the people who need them.
It needs to defend itself and respond to these attacks. It's also a priority for me to urgently address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. At my direction, our teams are working in the region, including communicating directly with the governments of Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and other Arab nations, and the United Nations to surge support and humanitarian consequences for Hamas attack to help Israel. You know, we can't lose sight of the fact that the overwhelming majority of Palestinians had nothing to do with Hamas and Hamas's appalling attacks, and they're suffering as a result as well.
A rapidly rising Palestinian death toll, the difficulty of freeing hostages held by Hamas, and an increasingly vocal outcry from Arab nations, European allies and some Americans at home has pushed Biden's team to support a humanitarian pause to Israel's attacks and focus on getting aid to the Palestinians.
What we have said should be considered and explored are temporary localized humanitarian pauses to allow aid to get to specific populations and maybe even to help with the evacuation of people that want to get out, move more to the south. We do support that. We do not support a ceasefire at this time.
And for more on this, we earlier spoke to Peter Kuznick, who's a professor of history and director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University from Washington, D.C.
I think the world is demanding, really the world is demanding a ceasefire. The most that the United States is willing to concede right now would be a humanitarian pause, but even that would be a step in the right direction. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is just out of control right now. People are suffering greatly. As Biden and Blinken acknowledge, most of those who are suffering now were not Hamas supporters and are not responsible for the horrors, the outrages that Hamas committed. So the world is looking at these images, and it's very difficult to see these images of the devastation and death and injuries of the Gazan population and turn away and not see that something has got to be done besides just more bombing, more invasions, more military incursions. So yes, I think the pressure is enormous internationally for a ceasefire. Netanyahu has ruled that out categorically, but Israel is increasingly isolated in that regard. And the question, the real supporter of Israel is the United States and the Biden administration. And so the question is, what will the United States do? What is going on behind the scenes? What kind of discussions are we having? And what kind of pressure is Biden willing to put? So far, it doesn't look like it's very much.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.